Hello everyone and welcome to the chapter number 26 of Blender Master Course Animation Basics. If you are new to this course, then do check out the previous 26 chapters from the link of the playlist in the pinned comment. So to begin with, let's first understand what exactly is animation. And the answer to this is simple. Animation is nothing but an illusion. It is an illusion of motion. There are several images which are compiled into a video clip or sequence, and that's how an animation is made. Here, each and every image is said to be a frame in an animation sequence. So basically, if you're making an animation in Blender, you will be making several frames and then Blender will compile them to form an animation. Now, coming to the animation in Blender, we basically have to focus on two areas. One is this 3D view editor where you will be having all your objects, and the other one will be this timeline editor where we will be animating our frames. Now, the best way to understand about animation is to practically create a basic animation scene in Blender. So suppose I want to create this animation where this cube simply scales up and then scales down. So to make this simple animation with this cube selected, we have to insert a keyframe here. Inserting a keyframe means that we'll be telling the timeline editor that at frame number 1, our object would look like this. That is, it won't be scaled up, but it would just be a simple cube. But before that, there's one more important thing to note here, and this is related to the frames. Since I already told you that frames are the images which form the animation, but one question that may come in your mind is that how many frames are there in 1 second of animation? And the answer to this question can vary, because an animation can be made at 24 FPS, meaning frames per second, or even 30 FPS, or even 60 FPS or more. An animation of 24 FPS would mean that each second of the video or the animation will show 24 still images. Similarly, an animation of 30 frames per second would mean that each second of the animation will show 30 images. So it totally depends upon you that how much frames per second you need for your animation. But if you are a beginner, then I will suggest you to go for 24 or 30 frames per second. Let's suppose you choose 24 frames per second and you want to create an animation of 5 seconds. This would mean that your animation will have a total of 24 times 5, meaning 120 frames. So here at the frame number 1, I need the object to be at the default location with the default rotation and scale applied to it. And to make this the frame 1, we have to insert a keyframe here. The shortcut to insert the keyframe is to press I, and now a keyframe is inserted here. To view it properly, I'll expand the timeline editor, take the mouse cursor here and left click and drag like this. Here you can see a yellow dot, which means that a keyframe is inserted at the frame number 1, carrying the information that this cube is located at a particular location, having a particular rotation and also some scale. To view all this information mathematically, you can go to the object properties here, and here you can see that the location in all the 3 axes is 0 meters, the rotation of this cube in all the 3 axes is 0 degrees, and the scale is 1. We decided that the animation would be 5 seconds long and having 120 frames. But right now in the timeline editor, we can see that there are frames from the frame 1 to the frame 250, and to restrict it to 120 frames, here you have the option of the starting frame and the ending frame. The starting frame is set to 1, but we'll change the ending frame to 120 and press enter. Now only the area between frame 1 and frame 120 is highlighted. Now to make that animation of the cube scaling up, we have to select a frame here. Let's suppose the frame number 40. So I left click here, and now the frame number 40 is selected, and if I make any changes to this cube and insert a keyframe at the frame number 40, we'll get a small animation starting from frame number 1 to the frame number 40. Let's try to do this. So to scale it up in the Y direction, press S and Y and move your cursor away and left click to finalize. Now to insert a keyframe at the frame number 40, press I, and now we have a keyframe here. This keyframe is carrying the information that at the frame number 40, this cube will be scaled up like this in the Y axis. Now to check this animation between the frame number 1 to frame number 40, we have to take this pointer to the frame number 1. So you can either left click like this, or else you can also left click and drag like this. So we'll take it to the frame number 1, and to play the animation, press the space bar. Press space bar to stop the animation. And so this was a basic example about how animations are made in Blender. Similarly, I can create an animation after the frame number 40. So suppose I take this timeline to the frame number 80, and here I decide that the animation should be like it is scaling up in Z direction. So for this, I will press S and then Z and scale it up like this. Now to insert a keyframe, press I, and here in the timeline editor, we have a keyframe inserted at the frame number 80. 120. So if I again take this to the frame number 1 and play the animation, you will see that it first scales up in the y-axis and then in the z-axis. And now suppose I want that at the frame number 120, which is the last frame, the object should return back to its default state. So one way to do this is to go to the object properties here and change the value of scale back to 1 in all the 3 axes. But a better way is to go to the timeline editor, left click on this keyframe at the frame number 0. Now the other two are no more yellow colored, that's because they're unselected. Now we'll create a duplicate of this keyframe at the frame number 0 and place it at the frame number 120. For this, press Shift plus D, and remember that while doing this, your mouse cursor should be in the timeline editor and not in the 3D viewport. Otherwise, it will create a duplicate of the cube in your 3D viewport instead of this keyframe. And now we'll drag it like this and place it at the frame number 120. Left click to finalize. And now if I go to the frame number 1 and play the animation, then it first scales up in the y-axis, then in z-axis, and finally it scales down to its original scale value of 1. And also, apart from scaling, you can create an animation of an object moving in a particular axis or rotating. For example, if I had a UV sphere, by pressing Shift plus A, going to mesh and selecting the UV sphere, placing it in Y direction by pressing G and then Y, and let's place it here. Now, one thing to note here is that the keyframes that were previously present here are no longer visible in the timeline editor, and that's because they were assigned only to the cube, not to this UV sphere or any other object in the scene. So suppose I want to make an animation of this UV sphere in which it is changing its location from one point to another. For this, we'll go to the frame number 1. You can also change the position of your frame from here, which is the current frame value. Suppose I type 20, then the current frame will be set to 20. But right now, since we want to place this pointer at the frame number 1, so we'll type 1 and press enter. Now at the frame number 1, we'll move it up in the Z direction like this. Let's zoom out, and to insert a keyframe at this position, press I, and here we have the keyframe inserted. And now if I go to any frame like frame number 60, which is exactly in the middle of frame 1 and frame 120, and move it in Y direction like this, and if I now insert a keyframe by pressing I, then here we have another keyframe inserted at the frame number 60. Now we'll go to the last frame, which is frame number 120, and I'll create a duplicate of the frame number 0 by pressing Shift plus D and placing it at the frame number 120. And now if I play the animation by pressing the space bar, you will notice that both the objects are now animated. The cube scaled up in the Y and the Z axis and then scaled down, and similarly this UV sphere changed its location from its current position to a new position in the Y axis and then returned back to its original position. And this is how the animation works in Blender. Now you can even animate the colors or basically the materials of your object. And to show how it works, I'll delete these objects in my scene. So with the UV sphere selected, hold down the Shift button and select this cube, press X to delete them, and let's add the Suzanne or the monkey model. So press Shift plus A, go to mesh and select the monkey model. To make it smooth, right click and select the shade smooth, and to fix its geometry, go to the modify properties and we'll apply the subdivision surface modifier. So click on add modifier, go to generate, and here you will find the subdivision surface. So I'll select this. Let's increase the levels viewport to a higher value like 3 or 4. And now to create an animation including the materials or the colors, we first have to give some material to this monkey object. So I'll go to the material properties here and click on the new material. Now here we have the default material applied to this monkey object. You can also open a shader editor to set up a new material for this monkey object as we discussed in the chapter number 21 to 24. But right now we'll be assigning the material from here in the material properties editor only. And before assigning any color to it, let's first turn on the material preview mode. You can even turn on the render preview from the fourth icon here, but right now I will be working on the material preview mode only. Now if I go to the base color and assign it any random color, for example blue color, then this object will be having blue color as its material, and that too for all the frames here. For example, if I drag this timeline editor and release it anywhere in the timeline editor, we'll notice that our monkey object is having the same blue material, and that is because we have not yet assigned any keyframes here. Only when I will assign some keyframes, then that particular frame will carry a specific information about the material, and then we will be able to see the animation. For example, if I go back to the frame 1 and if I want that this monkey object should have blue color at the frame 1, so I'll go to the material properties here, and here you have a small dot which is basically used to set up keyframes. So if I left click on it, you will notice that this circle turns into this shape, and here in the timeline editor we have this first keyframe inserted at the frame number 1. And now suppose suppose I take it to the frame number 120, and at this frame, suppose I want the color of this object to be red. So I'll go back to the material properties, select the base color and change it to red color. To insert a keyframe here, click on this icon against the base color, and now a keyframe is inserted at the frame number 120. Now if I place the cursor over frame number 1 and play the animation, you will notice that the color of the object slowly changes from blue to red color. And this is how you animate colors or materials in Blender. You can do the same with other properties as well, like the metallic strength, roughness, or even the emission. So basically any parameter that has this small dot against its name can be animated just by inserting two keyframes at different places, and then the animation will be created. For example, if we have to animate the roughness, then go to the timeline editor, take this to the frame number 1, and we'll assign the default value of roughness, which is 0.5, to this frame. So at this value, click on this small icon to insert a keyframe, and now the keyframe that you are seeing here is carrying two informations. One is about the base color, which is blue, and other is about the roughness, which is 0.5. And now we'll go to the frame number 120, and suppose at this frame, I want the roughness to be exact 0. To insert the keyframe, I will click on this icon, and now this last frame, that is frame number 120, is also carrying two informations. One is about the base color, which is red, and the other one is about the roughness, which is 0. To see the animation, we'll take this pointer to the frame number 1 and press the space bar. Now you will notice two things. One is the color change from blue to red, and the other thing is the change in roughness from 0.5 to 0. Initially at the frame number 1, our object was blue colored and having high roughness, but at the last frame, it is red colored and having a reflecting surface with no roughness. And now to revise all the concepts that we have covered in this chapter so far, we'll be making this simple loop animation in Blender. So to begin with it, I'll first delete this monkey object. So press X to delete. Now if you look closely at this animation, you will notice that we first need to make this base and the hollow spaces where these balls will fall. And for creating this base, the best object to start with will be a cylinder, because we'll scale it down to form a disc-like structure. So let's come back to Blender, and to add the cylinder, press Shift plus A, go to Mesh and select the cylinder. Now tab into the edit mode, and let's scale it down in the Z direction by pressing S and then Z, and scale it down like this. Left click to finalize and get back to the object mode by pressing the tab key. Now to make the hollow spaces, we'll be using the Boolean modifier. We learned about this modifier in this chapter of this course, so if you haven't watched it yet, you can check the link of this chapter as well as all the remaining chapters from the pinned comment. Now since we need to make hollow circular shapes like this, we'll be adding cylinders and then apply the Boolean modifier. So press Shift plus A, go to Mesh and select the cylinder. Tab into the edit mode, press S to scale it down. Let's scale it down further. Let's move it slightly upwards by pressing G and then Z, and left click to finalize. To view the size properly, we'll go to the top view by pressing 7 on the numpad, and I think that we should scale it down further, so I'll press S and scale it down like this. Left click to finalize, and let's move it upwards in the Y direction to place it here. But right now we need 4 such cylinders. So let's come out of the edit mode, press Shift plus D to create duplicate, move it down in the Y direction, and after placing it in the middle, left click to finalize its position. Now let's move it in X direction by pressing G and then X, and let's place it here. Left click to finalize. Let's try to change the angle, and here we have 2 cylinders added here. Now to create 2 more duplicates, I will select both of them together and then create a duplicate. So with this one selected, hold down the Shift button and left click to select the other cylinder. Go back to the top view by pressing 7 on the numpad. Now press Shift plus D and place the duplicates here and left click to finalize. Let's change the angle, and now we have 4 different cylinders. To create the hollow space, we need to see the depth of these cylinders inside this base. So we'll turn on the X-ray mode for this, but before that we need to enter the solid mode, because the X-ray mode cannot be accessed from the material preview mode. So I'll go to the solid mode, press Alt plus Z to turn on the X-ray mode. To view the depth properly, we'll go to the side view by pressing 3 on the numpad, and to create the hollow space, we need these cylinders to have more depth inside this base. So I'll select all 4 of them by dragging like this, and now if I release, all the 4 cylinders will get selected, and I'll move them down in the Z axis by pressing G and then Z, and let's place them here and left click to finalize. Now I'll turn off the X-ray mode by pressing Alt plus Z, and to create the hollow spaces, we'll use the Boolean modifier. So I'll select this base, go to the modifier properties, click on add modifier, and in the generate, you will find this Boolean modifier. Now I have to add all these 4 cylinders in this object option here, and for this I would need to create 4 duplicates of this Boolean modifier. But a better way is to take all these 4 cylinders and join them together into a single object. For this I'll select one of them, and with the Shift key holded, I'll select the other 3. To join them together, press Ctrl plus J, and now they are converted into a single object with the name as cylinder.002. Let's select the base again, go to the object, click on this eyedropper, place it on one of the cylinders and left click. Now in the object option, we have the cylinder.002 camera.002 assigned. To apply this modifier, press Ctrl plus A, and now to view the hollow space, select this group of cylinders and press X to delete them. Here we have these hollow spaces created in our base. Now to give it a better and a realistic look, we'll apply the bevel modifier. So go to the modify properties, click on add modifier, and in the generate, you will find the bevel modifier. So I'll select this. Let's change the number of segments to a high value like 3 or maybe 4, and now it looks perfect. Now to make the balls, we'll go to the top view by pressing 7 on the numpad. Then we'll place the 3D cursor over here by pressing shift and right click, and we'll add a UV sphere. So press shift plus A, go to mesh and select the UV sphere. Tab into the edit mode and scale it down. Left click to finalize. Let's view it from a different angle. I think that we should move it upwards in the Z axis. So press G and then Z to move it upwards, and left click to finalize. Now we'll need 3 more UV spheres. So I'll again go to the top view, come out of the edit mode, and I'll create a duplicate of it by pressing shift plus D and move it in the Y direction. Let's place it here and left click to finalize. Now again press shift plus D and place this duplicate over here and left click to finalize. Now we'll create one more duplicate and place it here. So press shift plus D and press X to move it in X direction and place it here. Left click to finalize, and now we have this base and these 4 UV spheres or these balls added in our scene. To make them look realistic, I will select all 4 of them by holding the shift button and left click to select each one of them. Now we'll make them smooth by right mouse button and applying the shade smooth. And now to make this rotating rod with its tiny stand, we need to place our 3D cursor over here. So press shift plus C. Now here we have the 3D cursor relocated at the world origin. So to make the stand of the rod, we'll add a cylinder here. So press shift plus A, go to mesh and select the cylinder. Tab into the edit mode, press S to scale it down and left click to finalize. Now I'll zoom in, and to view it here, I need to move it upwards in the Z direction. So I will press G and then Z to move it up and left click to finalize. I think that we should scale it down even further, so I will press S and move my cursor towards it and left click to finalize. And to move it slightly upwards, I will press G and Z and move it like this. Left click to finalize, and now we have this stand ready. So I will come out of the edit mode, and to make the rotating rod, I will add another cylinder in my scene. So press shift plus A, go to mesh and select the cylinder. To scale it down, we'll go to the edit mode and press S. Left click to finalize. Now we should scale it up in the Z axis. So press S and Z and scale it up like this. Now to adjust the size of the rod properly, I will again press S to scale it and scale it down like this. Let's move it upwards by pressing G and then Z and place it here. Now we need to rotate it in the X or the Y axis. Both of them will work, because if I press R and X and rotate it like this, then it is perfectly aligned. But if I right click and then press R and Y to rotate it in the Y axis and then move my cursor like this, then also it will get perfectly aligned. So you can choose any of the two axes, either the X axis or the Y axis. For now I'll be choosing the X axis. So press R and X, and I need to rotate it by exact 90 degrees. So I will type 90 and press enter. Let's bring it down by pressing G and then Z and place it over here. To make the rod thinner, I will scale it down again, and to make it long, I will scale it up in the Y axis. So let's scale it up like this and left click to finalize. Now I'll go to the front view by pressing 1 on the numpad. Let's zoom in. I think that we should move the rod slightly downwards, so I will press G and Z to move it down in the Z axis, and let's place it here and left click to finalize. Now we have all the objects ready in our scene. Let's come out of the edit mode. We have this base, all the 4 balls, this rod which will be rotating, and this rod stand. Now to create the animation, there is one important thing to keep in mind. If you carefully notice here, you will observe that the base and the rod are rotating in opposite directions. And to create an animation like this, we first have to rotate this rod in the Z direction by 45 degrees. The reason for doing this is that now the animation will start with the rod being in this position. Previously, if I press Ctrl plus Z to undo, it was placed like this, and with this position of rod, it would not have been possible to move the balls up and down, because otherwise the ball would collide with this rod, and that is why we rotated it by 45 degrees. To get that rotation back, press Ctrl plus Shift plus Z, and here we have the rotated rod. To insert a keyframe, press I, and here at the frame 1, we have this keyframe inserted. Now I'll go to the frame 120, and since we are creating a loop animation, we want this rod to rotate completely and return back to its original position at the last frame, so that the rotation would be same as that at the frame number 1. For this we have to rotate this by 180 degrees. So press R and then Z, type 180 and press enter. To insert the keyframe, press I, and now if I go to the frame number 1 and play the animation, you will observe that this rod would rotate in the Z axis by an angle of 180 degrees. But its rotation is very slow, and to fix this, we'll reduce the number of frames here. Instead of having 120 frames, we'll be keeping a total of 60 frames. To do this, go to this end option and change it to 60. Now to move this keyframe to to the 60th frame, select it with the left mouse button click, and you can simply move it just like you move any other object in your 3D viewport. Go to the timeline editor and press G to move it. So I will place it at the frame number 60 and left click to finalize. Now if I go back to the frame number 1 and play the animation, you will notice that the rod rotated by 180 degrees, and this time it was faster than the previous one. Now we need to rotate this base in the direction opposite to that of this rod. So I will select this, go to the frame number 1, press I to insert the keyframe, then we'll go to the frame number 60, and to rotate it press R and Z, and to rotate it in the opposite direction I will type -180 this time. Press enter to confirm and press I to insert the keyframe. Now if I go back to the frame number 1 and play the animation, you will notice that the base and the rod moved in directions opposite to each other. And now we'll move forward and we'll be animating these balls. So we'll go to the frame number 1 and I'll select this ball, and with the shift key hold it this ball. Now initially at the frame number 1, all these balls will not be inside this hollow space. We will be moving these two balls slightly upwards and the other two will remain in the hollow space. To do this, press G and Z and let's move it upwards by a small value like 0.2 meters. So I type 0.2 and press enter. To insert the keyframe here, press I, and here we have the keyframe inserted. Now the position of these UV spheres will be the same on the frame number 1 and the last frame. So we'll go to the frame number 60, and with this keyframe selected, press Shift plus D and move it to the frame number 60. Now if I go to the frame number 1 and instead of playing the animation, this time we'll be dragging a pointer like this to check at which frame we need to animate these balls. So we'll check for the frame where these balls are just above the hollow space, and at frame around 30 it looks perfect. But to confirm, we'll go to the top view by pressing 7 on the numpad, and these two balls are selected here. So at frame number 31 it looks like this, and if I go to the frame number 30 it looks like this. So I think that we should keep it to frame number 31 since it will be exactly in the middle. So I will press I to insert the keyframe here. Then if I move forward, we notice that the next frame where these two intersect or appear together will be somewhere near the last frame, and we already have a keyframe inserted here. Let's change the angle, and now to show the motion of the balls moving upwards and downwards, we again have to go to the frame number 1 and we'll drag this pointer to somewhere in the middle of the first keyframe and the second keyframe. So we'll take it to somewhere near 15 or 16, and at this position we'll move them upwards because the animation will be like the rod and the base are rotating and the ball first moves up and then comes down. So with both the balls selected, press G and Z and let's move them upwards by a value of somewhere around 1 meters. So I type 1 and pressed enter, press I to insert the keyframe, and now let's check how it looks. So I'll go to the frame number 1, press spacebar to play the animation. One thing that we noted here is that the animation was a little bit quick. As soon as it reached the top, or basically its maximum height, instantly on the next frame it began to go downwards. But in reality, if a ball is thrown upwards, it remains at its maximum height for a fraction of a second. And to fix this, I'll select this frame and we'll create a duplicate of it. Let's move it here. The reason for doing this is that now the ball will go from this point at the frame number 1 to its maximum height at frame number 15 or 16 and will stay there till the frame number 20 or 21, and then it will come down at the frame number 31. So now if I go to the frame number 1 and play the animation, we see that it now looks a bit more natural than before. And now we'll make these balls go inside this hollow space, and for this I will press G and Z, and since previously we moved them upwards by 0.2 meters, so to move them down we have to type -0.2 and press enter to confirm. Press I to insert the keyframe. Let's go to the frame number 1 and play the animation. Now there's one more problem here, which is the animation from the frame number 31 to 32 is very fast, and that's because the two keyframes are just adjacent to each other. To set them apart, I'll select the first one, press G to move it, and let's place it here. Left click to finalize the position. Let's go back to the frame number 1 and press spacebar to play the animation. And this time it looks better than before. Right now we'll be seeing only the animation till the frame number 30 or 32 because we have not yet animated the part ahead it. So our basic animation looks good, but still there are some things which we can fix here to make it look perfect. For example, at the frame number 31, the position of these balls is not perfect. You can see that both of these balls are colliding with the base object. To fix this, I'll select this base object, press R and Z to rotate it in the Z axis, and we'll slightly rotate it. Left click to confirm and press I to insert the keyframe. One important thing to note here is that the rotation in the Z axis should be very slight, otherwise the animation will not look natural. So again I'll go to the frame number 1, drag this pointer like this to check if there is some mistake or not. Like here at the frame 30, you can see that these two balls are again colliding with this base. So I will rotate it again, press R and Z, and let's slightly rotate like this. Left click to finalize, press I to insert the keyframe, and now it looks perfect. You can also go to the next frame with the help of the arrow keys. So if I click the right arrow key, you will jump to the next frame. Similarly, if you have to go back to the previous frame, you can click the left arrow button. Right now the frame number 30 looks perfect. Also frame number 31 and 32 are looking perfect as well. Now moving ahead, I'll reselect these two balls. Take this pointer somewhere in between frame number 32 and 60. So I'll take it to somewhere near 45 or 44. Let's move them upwards in the Z direction to reach their maximum height. So I will press G and Z, and we'll move them upwards by 1.2 meters. Press enter to confirm, and we'll insert a keyframe here. Now we'll go to the frame number 32, and instead of playing the animation, I will use the arrow keys to check each and every frame, and this is how our animation would look like. Till now it looks perfect. Even till frame number 57 it looks perfect. 58 is also fine, and 59 and 60 are also perfect. So we are done with the animation of these two balls. So we'll go to the frame number 1, and we'll check if the animation looks natural or not. So press spacebar to play the animation, and this is how it looks. So at the beginner level it looks perfect, and now I'll select the other two balls. I selected this one, and with the shift key holded I'll select the other one. So we'll go to the frame number 1 and insert a keyframe. Press I, and here we have the keyframe inserted. Now to check the next frame where these two balls would be at the same position at that of the hollow space, we'll drag this timeline cursor. So we'll drag it like this, and somewhere around the frame number 30 the balls will be at the required location. So I will press I to insert the keyframe, and to check if the position of these two balls is perfect or not, we'll go to the top view by pressing 7 on the numpad. This ball looks perfect, but we can adjust this ball so that it appears somewhere in the middle. So I will select this one, press G to move it, and since we are in the top view, whatever change in location we will do will only affect the location in X and Y axis. So we'll place it over here and left click to finalize. Press I to insert a keyframe. In fact, even this ball also appears to collide with the base. So I'll select this one, press G to move it, let's place it here, I to insert the keyframe, and now it looks perfect. So I'll change the angle, select these two balls again, go to the last frame which is frame number 60, and we'll insert a keyframe for these two balls at these positions. For this press I, and here we have the keyframe inserted. Again, to check the perfection of their positions, we'll go to the top view, and they look almost perfect. So we'll not do any more changes here, and now it's the time to move these balls up and down. For this, I'll take this pointer to the frame number 1, drag this pointer like this, and we'll stop it somewhere in the middle of these two frames. Let's move them upwards by 1 meters. So I will press G and Z, type 1, and press enter. To insert a keyframe, press I, and here we have the keyframe inserted. And if I play the animation, we again notice the same problem that we faced in case of these two balls, which is that at this frame they are at their maximum height, and just at the next frame they begin to fall, which gives it a slightly unrealistic or an unnatural look. To fix this, I'll select this keyframe, move it like this, and create a duplicate of it and place it here. And now if I play the animation, by dragging this cursor, we will observe that the two balls will stop in between and then go downwards. We did the same for these two balls as well, but yes, we did one small mistake here that you can see in the timeline editor. We created a duplicate of this keyframe, that is the keyframe at the frame number 16, and placed it at the frame number 20, but we did not do the same with this one. Always remember that if the area between any two keyframes is shaded like this, it means that the second keyframe is the duplicate of the first one. As a result, we can say that these two are the same keyframes, but there are no more duplicates in the timeline editor. So with this keyframe selected, we'll create a duplicate of it. So press Shift plus V and move it like this. Left click to finalize the position. Now I'll select the other two balls, and we have the animation of the first 30 frames completely ready for all the 4 balls. So now let's move to the next 30 frames. We'll take the pointer to somewhere between the 30th and the 60th frame, like somewhere near 45 or the 44th frame. We'll move them upwards so that they reach their maximum height at this frame. So press G and Z, and let's move them up by 1 meters. Press I to insert the keyframe, and we'll create a duplicate of this keyframe also so that it stops at its maximum height for a fraction of a second. So I'll select this one, move it by pressing G, we'll place it here, press Shift plus D to create a duplicate and place it over here. Now I'll take this pointer over the frame number 1, slightly change the angle to view all the balls perfectly, and we'll check each and every frame with the help of the arrow buttons. So I will use the right arrow to go ahead in the timeline. Let's also keep changing the view or the angle. Let's move ahead, and somewhere it looks perfect till now. We have completed 30 frames and there is no such visible problem or any imperfection in our animation. Let's move ahead by clicking the right arrow, and the main issue that you might face will be somewhere near the ending frames or the middle frames. So on the frame number 56, there's no such issue. We'll go ahead to the frame number 57 and still it looks perfect. Similarly 58 and 59, and there is no such imperfection, and the last frame, which is frame number 60, also looks perfect. And so we have created our first basic animation in this course, and to give it some material, we'll be using the shaders from the library that we created in the chapter numbers 21 to 24 of this course. There we learnt about materials in complete detail and also created some basic and procedural shaders. And to get that material library here, we have to add a new window here. So I'll take my cursor over here and this double-headed arrow would appear. Then right click and select the horizontal split. Take it in the middle to divide the area into two equal parts. Now to convert this into the material or the asset browser, click on this icon and select the asset browser. To view only the specific materials that we ourselves created, click here and select the user library. We created all these materials in the chapter number 21 to 24 of this course, and also we'll be creating some more materials when we learn about advanced shaders further in this course. But for now, to give these objects some material, we'll go to the render preview mode. Let's change the render engine to cycles. So go to the render properties. By default it is set to EV, but I'll change it to cycles. And to get a proper lighting, click on this drop down arrow and turn off the scene world. And now we have a proper lighting in our scene. First we'll assign some material to this base. So I'll select this and let's apply the simple car paint shader to it. So I'll select this and drag it over like this, and if I release it, this material would get assigned to the base. Similarly, I'll select the stand of this rod and let's assign it the dark gray metal. So I'll select this and drop it over the rod stand, and here the material of the stand of the rod will change to dark gray metal. Similarly, we'll assign this brushed aluminium to this rod. So I will select this, drag it and place it over the rod, and the material is assigned. For the balls, we'll be using this glossy green paint, but we'll change the color of the balls later on. So I'll select this, drag it and place it on all the 4 balls. Similarly for the third one also, and for the fourth one as well. Now to change the color of these balls, I'll change this to the shader editor. So click on this icon and select the shader editor. Now I'll select one of the balls, zoom into the shader editor, and if I try to change the color from here, you will notice that the color change will be visible on all the balls, and this is because all these 4 balls are having the same material. To fix this, we need to create a duplicate of this material, and we'll make changes in that duplicate. To do this, click on this icon here, and now we notice that the name of the material changes to glossy green painted.001. This .001 means that it is the duplicate of the glossy green painted material. And now if I try to change the color from here, suppose I choose the yellow color, then in my 3D viewport, only the color of this specific object will change and not the others. Now I'll select the second one, create a duplicate, and let's change the color to blue color. Similarly the third one, create a duplicate, go to the base color, and we'll change its color to green color, and let's keep the fourth one as the pink color. Now we have assigned the materials to all the objects in our scene. So I'll close this shader editor by right clicking here and selecting the join areas. Take this pointer towards the shader editor and left click. And now in the end, we'll learn how can we produce an output of this animation, or basically how can we render it. So the first step is to go to the camera view by pressing 0 on the numpad, and to change the camera view, press N, go to the view and turn on the lock camera to view. Now I'll zoom in and let's also adjust it like this. Right now the output that you will get will be in this landscape mode, but suppose you want to change it to the portrait mode. To do this, you have to open the output properties by clicking on this icon. Here you can control all the settings related to the output that you will render. Here you can see that the resolution is set to 1920 pixels in the X and 1080 pixels in the Y, which means that you will get the output in this landscape mode. And if you want to render it in the portrait mode, or basically that mode in which you watch YouTube shorts or Instagram reels, then you just need to reverse these values, meaning that in the X resolution I will type 1080, press enter, and in the Y resolution I'll type 1920 and press enter. To see the entire view properly, I'll turn off the lock camera to view. Now if I zoom out, this is the area that you will be seeing in the output which will be rendered. The frame rate here is set to 24 FPS, and since we are having 60 frames, so the total length of the final video will be 60 divided by 24, that is 2.5 seconds. But you can extend it even longer since it is a loop animation. Now we'll scroll down here, and here you have the output settings. The most important thing to change here is the file format. By default it is set to PNG, meaning that it will generate image outputs of each and every frame instead of generating a video. But because we need to render a video, so I'll go to the file format and change it to FFmpeg video. Now you also need to tell Blender at which particular location it should save your file. To do this, you have to use the output path path option. To set a particular location, click on this icon and then you can browse a particular location or some folder, and if you have to create a new folder then simply click on this icon and a new folder will be added. Let's name it videos and press enter to finalize. Now since I want to save the video in this folder, so I'll double click on it and let's change the name to something like first animation, then press enter and click on accept. And now we are ready to render the animation. So I'll click on this render button and select render animation. Now this screen will appear here which will show you the frame number that it is rendering and the sample count here. So it would take some time to render the entire video depending on the specifications of your PC, and you can also see the results here frame by frame. Also here I feel that we should have added a plane at the bottom to give it a better look, but right now it is rendering. So suppose you want to cancel it, so you can simply press escape key and the render will be cancelled. Now I'll close this, and to add a plane here, I will press Shift plus A, go to mesh and select the plane. Let's move it downwards by pressing G and Z and place it over here. Left click to finalize the position, tab into the edit mode and I will scale it 10 times. So I will press S and 10 and now it looks like this. But here in the camera view, the end of this plane is visible. To fix this, we'll scale the plane even more. So I will press S and to scale it twice, press 2 and then enter. And it's still not perfect, so I will scale it even more by pressing S and left click to finalize. Now I'll get back to the object mode and let's change the color of this plane by going to the material properties here, click on the new button, and now the default material is applied to the plane object. To change the base color, click here. And for a better contrast, we'll make the plane a little dark. So let's change it to grey color or maybe light blue color. Let's reduce the brightness even more and now it looks perfect. So we'll render this again by clicking on render and selecting the render animation. And now our final output looks like this. And also this brings us to the end of this chapter. One important thing before ending is that if you are learning animation in Blender for the very first time, it might be possible that your rendered video might be a bit different, or there may be some problems in it, some imperfections, and the best way to deal with this is to go to that specific part of the video where we discussed about that problem or the imperfection and try to resolve it in your Blender project. And if you have any doubts, then you can write them down in the comments below. So our next chapter will be the chapter number 27, Advanced Level of Animation Part 1. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel, press that notification bell so that you can get timely updates about the upcoming chapters. Thank you for watching and we'll see you in the next one.